So, Dave Ramsey. We all know him. Some of us love him. I personally have been following his baby step process for probably the last 8 months or so, ever since I came to the realization that following the investing gurus on YouTube and everything wasn't quite working out for me.
Terry, how do I get started?
Well, step one, buy my course.
I had done some successful house flips. I have a few investment properties, but personally, I just wasn't having much luck with that get-rich-quick scheme, so I decided that I needed to build wealth slowly over time. Now, I know this isn't the type of content that I normally make. A lot of what I do is heavily based around real estate in Cleveland particularly, but I wanted to make this video with hopes that it might help someone who's planning on buying a house in the near future to kind of get their life together and start making that plan so that way they can hopefully achieve it sooner rather than later. Now, if you're not familiar with Dave Ramsey, he has 7 steps to building wealth. And the first few are the ones that take the longest amount of time, and those are going to be saving $1,000 for an emergency fund, pay off all your debt as fast as possible. And then the third one is going to be saving 3 to 6 months of an emergency expense once all of your debt is paid off. Then you can start saving for your house. Now, his thinking on the criteria for buying a home is having a 20% down payment, making sure that it's on a 15-year mortgage, and that the mortgage payment is no more than 25% of your monthly take home for your pay. Now, that is some extremely strict criteria, and I kind of wanted to give you my experience personally because I found him late in the game, and I've had a lot of success with what I've done over the years. So if you're the type of person who has the discipline to skate outside the lines a little bit, I'm not saying a lot, you can still find potentially a lot of success while still getting into a home a little bit earlier. Now, I want to preface this with, if you are the type of person who can't skate outside of the lines with discipline, you should follow Dave Ramsey's plan to a T. But if you're able to have that comfortable leeway, I think it might be worth getting into a house sooner rather than later, depending on what your local market is. Now, like I said, I am currently following his 7 baby step program that he's come up with, and I'm on steps 4, 5, and 6 currently. Now, I say I'm doing them all at the same time because that's kind of how it works. Baby step 4 is you start investing 15% of every paycheck into some sort of mutual fund. Step 5 is start saving for a kid's college fund, and me and my wife are actually due next week, so we have started that fund as well. And then number 6 is pay off your house early. And I still have a mortgage on my house, and mortgages are an okay type of debt to get because real estate is a wealth building tool. Now, I did this whole process a little bit backwards because I found him late in the game. I already had some debt. I already had bought multiple houses. Even with doing that, I was able to find success with his whole program. In my opinion, I don't think you need to pay off all your debt before you buy a house, but that is a big factor in the amount of house that you can afford when it comes time to buy a home. So if your credit score is not that great or your debt to income ratio is too high, you are able to talk to a lender and they're able to coach you on what you need to pay off or potentially sell and get rid of, so that way you are able to afford that home. Now, the main thing with this is the more you pay off, the more house you're going to be able to get. And if you're in a real estate market that is a lot higher value, you're probably going to need to pay off or get rid of some of that debt before you can get into a home. If you think about it, the average car payment in America is $500. And if you got rid of that payment, that's another $25,000 of buying power that you have. And even more on top of that, if you have student loans, your payment's probably around $500 as well. That's $50,000 extra that you could potentially spend on a home. And at least in my area in Cleveland, that's the difference between being in a good neighborhood and a bad neighborhood. So just by not having that debt, it's going to drastically change the type of house that you're able to get. I have a separate video on how to pay off your debt a little bit faster and how to save up for that down payment. So go check that out after this video if you want. Once you have that proper debt to income ratio, especially if you're living in the Cleveland area, it's definitely worth buying because a mortgage payment is cheaper than rent in this area, which is still really wild because that's not the case in many other places. And I have a whole other video about that too. If you're able to comfortably get that house and afford the maintenance that comes along with it, it's totally worth it because you're going to be building equity in the home over time rather than just giving your payment to the landlord every single month and letting that money go to waste. The other thing with the mortgage payment is that it's going to go up a little bit over time, but not the amount that rent will. You're going to have a little bit of increase in taxes that you pay monthly, and then you're also going to have a change in homeowners insurance over time as well as that price goes up. But it's not going to make or break you. This payment is set in stone for 15 to 30 years depending on what type of loan you go with. In my opinion, where it comes time to buy a house is once you have an emergency fund saved up, Because when you own a house, if a furnace goes out, that could potentially be a $5,000 replacement. And if you don't have that emergency fund saved up and ready to go, you could be in a pretty bad situation where you have to take on more debt just to keep your house warm in the wintertime. And you don't want to find yourself in that position. So when you're buying a home, make sure you're ready for those potential expenses. They don't always happen, but it's better to be prepared. The other issue with waiting to buy a home is the fact that if you have about $50,000 in debt and you follow the Ramsey steps to a T, it usually takes 1 to 2 years to get completely out of debt and start saving for your down payment. And if you have over $100,000 of debt, that's going to be that 3 to 5 year mark before you even come close to being ready to start saving for a down payment. And the issue with that is the fact that there is inflation. The housing market usually goes up about 5% every year. So if you wait that 3-year timeline, a $250,000 house becomes $288,000. And that almost $40,000 increase is almost enough to price you out of buying that home, or potentially put you in a cheaper location that you don't like as much or may not be as safe. So in my opinion, as long as you've got that emergency fund and you have the proper debt to income ratio, you really should be looking for a home. Now that brings up the down payment issue. 20% is what Dave recommends that you do before you buy a home. And I agree with that. You don't have to pay the private mortgage insurance if you have the means to do so. It's a pretty big chunk of money that you have to save up, but if you can do it, you should. If you have to move before 5 years, it's going to give you a little bit of leeway to where you're not losing money. But if you only put 3% down and you have to move very quickly, it's going to be hard to get your money back. You might lose a little bit. When you're buying a home, you should plan to be in there for at least 5 years. That's when you start to make money on that lower down payment. Anything less than 20% of a down payment, you're gonna have to pay private mortgage insurance on, but it's not expensive enough that it's gonna break your budget. So I don't personally think it's a bad thing, just so that way you can start building that equity and that 5% a year, because the private mortgage insurance is right around 0.5% to 1.5% of the value of the home. Getting that 5% appreciation every year, it makes a little more sense to take on that PMI. Now, one thing that I've kind of struggled with going through this whole process is doing the 15-year mortgage. Since it's a shorter term, you're gonna have a higher payment, which could potentially price you out of some areas, especially if you're in a higher value market. Now, there's good and bad to it. Discipline is the main thing. If you're taking on that 30-year mortgage, you can still pay it off in 15 relatively easily, as long as you're making those extra payments. If you can afford to do it on a 15-year mortgage, you definitely should, because it's going to force you to pay it off early. Whereas if you have the option to save a few $100s every single month and just make that lower monthly payment, you're probably going to choose to do so. And that's why I say it's so important to have the discipline to take on the 30-year mortgage. What I currently do is set it and forget it. I pay an extra $500 a month on my house, and right now I'm projected to pay off my house right around the 10-year mark. And my goal is to do it even sooner than that. But since I'm doing auto pay at $500 a month, I really am not giving myself the option to not do it. By having the 30-year mortgage, it's going to allow you to borrow more money, which isn't the goal for the whole Ramsey thing. But in a lot of parts of the United States, they're just so unaffordable that you kind of have to do it if you want to buy a house. And if I'm being honest, I've never regretted buying any of the houses that I've bought in the past. I got about $40,000 of appreciation on the first house. I think I was at like closer to 100 on the second house that I bought. And then with the one that I'm currently living in and the work that I've done to it, I currently have, I think, around $150,000 worth of value gain. It doesn't always work out like that where you have these huge gains over a fast period of time, but I do renovations to my houses when I buy them because I have the ability to do so, where that might not be totally feasible for you. But in that first house that I bought, all I did to it was paint and floors and own it for 7 years. And it went up $40,000 in value. And I think that's something more feasible to expect to have when you're buying a home, is over that amount of time to gain. Now, if you're buying a house and you need down payment assistance, do not take it, because the programs that are currently out there, they're garbage in my opinion. It's just another loan that gets tacked onto your monthly mortgage, and you have to pay it back over the course of 5 years. And if you sell your house early, you have to pay off the remainder of that loan. And it's fair for them to ask for that money because it's a loan, it's not a grant. You have to pay it back. The biggest problem with these down payment assistance programs is the fact that you have zero equity in your home when you go to buy it. And if you need to sell within 1 to 2 years for whatever reason, you will not have built any equity because you're still paying back a loan. So you'll find yourself in a spot where you're stuck in that house because you can't afford the extra closing fees that go along with it, just due to the fact that the house hasn't appreciated and you have no mortgage pay down that's happened. The other thing is, do not buy your rate down for a temporary amount of time, because if you can't afford it now, you're not going to be able to afford it in a year or 2 years when that rate goes up. That's just a pro tip from someone who's seen people get in some pretty sticky situations. Now, take what I say with a grain of salt, because I agree that you should be following the baby steps directly to a T, because it is going to be the safest way that you get yourself into financial freedom, but it is an extremely conservative way to do so. And just with how inflation is going and the fact that everything is so much more expensive than it used to be, I don't think it's going to be stopping anytime soon. So getting into the house now might make more sense if you're able to do so comfortably, rather than waiting 3 to 5 years to have all of your debt paid off and 3 to 6 months worth of that emergency expense. I think there's a little bit of leniency that can happen, but like I said multiple times throughout this video, if you're the type of person who does not have the discipline to keep up with paying those extra payments and working super hard to keep paying off that debt after you have a home, then you should really stick to a rental for that temporary amount of time while you're paying it off, and then cut up your credit cards. I still have my credit cards. I don't really care to keep them, but my wife still likes having it around, and she is extremely disciplined, and she's taught me a lot throughout this whole process as well. So I think there's going to be at least 1 or 2 credit cards in our family still. Real estate's one of those tools that helps you build that long-term wealth, but if you're taking on this task, you realistically should be looking to pay down all of your debt, including your house, as fast as possible. So I hope this information at least helps someone if they're starting to go through their journey of being debt-free. Definitely let me know down in the comments what your thoughts are on everything. I can see it from both sides, but I do very much promote the same mindset that he's got. And I think that it's so important to focus on building that wealth over time. So with all that being said, I'm gonna leave the video there. If you're trying to move to the Cleveland area or anywhere in the United States in general, I can definitely help you either get hooked up with a realtor, or I can help you buy in the greater Cleveland area if you're trying to do that. We've got a super affordable market here, and I help a lot of people relocate over this way every single year. So reach out to me if you're thinking about making a move. All my contact info is down in the description. And before you go, like and subscribe, because it's going to keep you up to date with a bunch of different real estate stuff. And with all that being said, I'll catch you in the next one. Thanks for watching.